Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's Open to Export webinar about the importance of learning how to do exporting properly. My name is William Barnes-Graham, and I am the Senior Content Editor at the Institute of Export and International Trade. Open to Export is a free online service helping small businesses get ready to sell overseas through our step-by-step articles and guides, regular webinars, our Export Action Plan tool, and our quarterly competitions. You can find out about all of these on our website at opentoexport.com. Open to Export is powered by the Institute of Export and International Trade, the UK's professional membership body for traders, endorsed by the World Trade Organization and the International Chamber of Commerce as a small business champion. We offer a unique range of individual and business membership benefits, education and training catering for beginners through to master's degrees, and an always exciting and prestigious program of events celebrating UK businesses' exporting achievements. We will be running a live Q&A later in the session, and you can ask questions at any point using the question box on the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. The general principle here is that we'll ask questions that are relevant to the broader audience, so we won't be able to go into specifics as such, but if you do have any specific questions, we can contact you afterwards. We're delighted to have two former students speaking on today's webinar in Holly Tong and Jade Forshaw. But to give an overview of support provided by the Institute, we first have Kevin Shakespeare. Over to you, Kevin.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kevin Shakespeare, and my role at the Institute covers several aspects, including delivery of the educational programs and development as well. So what I'll do today is talk through the programs and I guess the benefits for students, learners of the program themselves. What I wanted to do, first of all, though, is just sort of say in my years working with the Institute, nothing gives myself and the students and everyone at the Institute more sort of greater sense of good and achievement is actually seeing the learners achieve, and our graduation ceremony at the Mansion House in London is always a fantastic event in which the learners can go along and with friends and members of the family and work colleagues as well. So it is a fantastic achievement to everyone who has completed our qualifications over the years, and hopefully for those on the call, for anyone starting out on their learning journey and their international trade career. Now, I think, as we know, both exporting and importing can be complex. There are different complexities depending on the product, depending on the type of part of the world that you're actually exporting to, and there's so much to consider even before Brexit, which we'll talk about shortly as well. So students and businesses need to make sure they've got effective terms of sale, including what we'll talk about on Incoterms, to make sure they have the correct trade documentation, customs compliance, and most of all that everything is set up so businesses can get paid on time as well. So the Institute qualifications provide a lot of flexibility in what to learn and the actual approach to learning as well. But most of all, the Institute is committed to professionalizing the industry, about having professional people working in international trade and working for the businesses that engage in international trade as well. So next slide, please. So I would like to say our students have gone on to great things. There's some examples here of, if you like, the types of roles, whether that's a manager in trade compliance, directors, export sales managers, supply chain roles, logistics roles, and obviously a lot of our students have undertaken qualifications to evidence competency, so quality standards, whether that's in the like of export controls, authorized economic operator status, IEO, ITAR regulations as well. So that level of competence is really, really important in international trade. Okay, next slide, please. So how can international trade help educate you and your business? So the next few slides sort of talk over some of the topic areas that really are covered in our qualifications. And there is a lot of depth. The qualifications are constantly updated in terms of developments, and clearly international trade is a very fast moving environment. So lots of questions that myself and colleagues always get is, will these learning materials be updated to cover the developments? And clearly Brexit is probably one of the key things. Now, clearly the answer is absolutely yes in that respect, because it's important that the Institute provide learners and their companies ultimately with the various developments and the various means of providing information of what's going on in the world of trade. And ultimately it helps to professionalize in how you do business, how you complete documentation, how you move goods overseas, how you negotiate commercial payment terms as well, and also identify potential opportunities to sell into export markets and the best way of actually selling overseas. Clearly, as I said, as well as professionalizing, creating best practice, we make sure we cover all the different elements of exporting, importing, supply chain, logistics, trade compliance in our qualifications. So very much our qualifications are targeted at everyone involved in the international trade process. So clearly that could be trade intermediaries such as trade advisors, it could be banks, it could be freight forwarders, it could be shipping companies, as well as clearly the importing and exporting companies themselves as well. I've talked about the sense of achievement. So from an employer perspective, certainly training and qualifications are very helpful, very important with respect to staff retention. So skill shortages are very prevalent in this industry, certainly before Brexit, and clearly companies need qualified and trained people. So certainly our qualifications can help with staff retention to actually make the employee feel valued and committed to the company and to actually help the company. Now, for the individual themselves, it obviously provides the opportunity for career progression, to hopefully within the company itself. But clearly from a marketing perspective and a competency perspective, our qualifications are good for the credibility and actually the saleability of the business. And we have quite a few examples of companies with competent staff, whether they've won the Queen's Award for export, various other awards, AEO, ISO accreditation, for example, BRC. And effectively it helps the credibility, and to have those qualified and competent people is very important. Now, in a few slides time, I'll talk about the apprenticeship levy, but that's opening up the opportunity potentially for companies to access government funding towards the institute qualifications. So I'll very much talk about that shortly as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So we'll just move on to the, yeah. So in terms of the issues of today, and clearly there's so much going on in international trade, and certainly working in this environment, it's a very exciting environment to work in at the moment. Now, of course, there's Brexit, and clearly that the impacts of that are being felt already and will continue to be felt. I've referred to AEO, standing for Authorised Economic Operator, and clearly that's a key part of our learning and effectively meeting the competency standards and potentially taking advantages of the benefits that AEO can provide. I've talked about trust, trade and customs compliance. So clearly we live in a world of regulation and compliance, and that clearly creates challenges for businesses and employees. But it also creates an opportunity to gain competitive advantage as well. So if a company can professionalize and do well, it can get more business from the competition, because certainly overseas buyers based abroad really looking for that level of competence and compliance. Increasing in the qualifications, the impact of blockchain, artificial intelligence, AI is being brought out as well, as that starts to change the likes of the international supply chain. And again, not just linked to Brexit, the impact of exchange rates and for example, the trade wars clearly come out as well there. So there's a lot going on there. And as you can see on the slide, there's examples of requirements and issues and inquiries that the Institute get. I've not even mentioned, obviously, that we have a new set of Incoterms next year, Incoterms 2020, which clearly will be covered in the qualifications as well. Thank you. Next slide, please. So in terms of how you learn, so what we're keen on providing at the Institute is I say different ways of learning. At the core principle is learners have access to an online learning campus. So the Institute is still very keen that we provide written learning materials. What we don't want to do to say to learners is, here's a load of books, just go away and read them, because clearly that's difficult. And also in international trade and the different disciplines, there are some books, but it's very difficult always to keep books up to date. So the learning materials are a core part of the learning that we provide. We also provide different ways of accessing learning through presentations, through virtual lectures and podcasts as well. So learners get the opportunity to learn in a different style. So we've heard examples of learners when they're commuting on a train, for example, listening to our learning. We've even had some examples of people walking their dog who are effectively listening to our learning. Wouldn't say I'd recommend that, having said that. So there's different ways of learning, but at the core is the written learning materials. We do have some qualifications that provide the opportunity for face-to-face training, and certainly for any organisations with a large cohort of learners, and we've had several examples of that, we're very happy to consider that as well. And some of our more recent customs qualifications, which I'll refer to, have that opportunity for face-to-face learning as well. For every module of learning, you have a specialist tutor who is experienced in the industry. Yes, they do have obviously a little bit of an academic background, but they're also they're specialists in international trade and the industry. We host regular learning webinars of 1 hour duration, which is effectively just linked through Citrix GoToMeeting. So it gives learners the opportunity to have a tutorial from a tutor, but just as importantly, the opportunity to ask questions. And we do find those learners that do participate, it's a very good form of learning and interaction as well. And it helps to create, if you like, a network of learners. So it makes it feel less remote as well. If you can dial into the webinars, you can speak to other learners, you can interact with the tutor as well. And we are very keen on this concept of a networking because yes, Brexit is starting to change it. International trade is now extremely valued, and these job roles are extremely valued now. But sometimes if you're working in a company, there's only 2 or 3 people in the company who are dealing in international trade, supply chain, logistics, customs. It can be sometimes quite lonely. So having that network is very, very important. And our learners have the opportunity to network. You have the opportunity to attend Institute events as members and also dial into various webinars that we have as well. So that networking, becoming part of a community, is a core. And I only need to look back at some of our previous learners to see how they've used those networking opportunities to obviously develop themselves, but ultimately develop the professionalism of their business as well. So clearly as a student, you have an opportunity to access international trade specialists, whether that's through the events, through networking. We sometimes have guest speakers on our webinars as well. So people who have either done our qualifications who are happy to put something back, specialists in the industry, in senior levels of international trade as well. So we have that opportunity to engage with specialists and hear, in addition to the learning, how an individual would go around a sort of certain topic, which clearly can be very, very important as well. Now, as part of the learning, we also have an online learning library as well. So we have journals, publications. We have clearly the Institute journal, publication World Trade Matters. We have others such as Freight Industry Times, the World Trade Organization publication, etc. So we have doing business guides overseas as well, which is a very important aspect of different ways of trading and the different requirements of trading internationally as well. So there is a wealth of information available in terms of international trade, and obviously the learner becomes part of that community and able to access everything. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what you learn now, to some extent, this is just a summary of some key topics, and is only a summary, and I'm not literally going to read everything out here, but it sort of goes through some of the key aspects and goes to the heart and the core of the practical elements of international trade. So how do I make a customs declaration? Am I responsible as a trader, an importer, an exporter for a customs declaration? How do I identify the correct customs classification codes? What is the best way of entering or selling into an overseas market? Is it an agent, distributor, joint venture? And how will it differ depending which country I'm trading with? Where does risk control pass in the trade journey, for example, through the use of Incoterms? What is trade compliance? How do I actually remain compliant? How do I create an export order file for the purposes of compliance, for example? How do I process a letter of credit successfully? So there's lots of different aspects to consider in our learning, and our learning provides the opportunity to obviously complete a qualification. And I think also an important part of what we provide is to complete each module, you complete an assessment, and the assessments are effectively completed online, but they're very much work-based. So they're linked to the circumstances of your business. So it becomes reflective of what you're doing in your job. So you're allowed to reflect on a process, what processes you do in your business, and then comment on them, evaluate them, and then in some cases or some qualifications to effectively provide recommendations as to whether that is the best way to do it or whether there are potentially other ways. So it sets that element of reflection of practices. So it's not a theoretical exercise, it's very much a practical exercise of how businesses operate and how your business operates. And hopefully, in a lot of cases, it potentially introduces new concepts and different ways of doing things as well. So lots of different things in terms of what you learn and lots of all the different disciplines that can arise in an international trade environment. Next slide, please. So in the context of the range of qualifications the Institute provide, we actually do provide qualifications, if you like, that are GCSE equivalent and as well, and some are used by schools, for example. But the core of the qualifications I've got on the slide in front of you here. So we provide qualifications at educational level 3, which is equivalent to A levels, right through to master's degree qualifications there, and everything in between. So we have qualifications which can be effectively studied as smaller qualifications like awards, slightly larger qualifications like certificates and diplomas, and then the full foundation degree, bachelor's degree elements as well. So the Institute provide a range of qualifications, and as you can see on the screen, there's some focused on all the disciplines in international trade, such as, for example, the level 3 certificate in international trade, the level 4 diploma in international trade, and some that are focused on specific disciplines, so such as customs, international transport, logistics and documentation, finance, for example, for people working in banks or working in finance departments of importers and exporters. So lots of different disciplines, and we also work with universities. So the Institute are involved in delivery of a foundation degree, which leads to a bachelor's degree and can lead to a master's degree. And for anyone on the call, if you have existing Institute qualifications, you effectively can be exempted towards bachelor's degrees and master's degrees as well. So there's lots of different options, and if you like, there's a full range of different qualifications which you can study, both in terms of educational level, but also in terms of disciplines as well. And in terms of trying to benchmark where anyone would stand in terms of which levels, if you engage with the institute, and we'll talk about the contact points that you can contact shortly, we can talk about your experience and which level is best for you to join at as well, because we want students to enjoy their experience and if you like, enter at the correct qualification level. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I talked earlier about apprenticeships. So something that has sort of come in more probably in the last year or two is the concept of the apprenticeship levy. So companies, larger companies with an annual pay bill over £3 million a year have to pay a levy to the government of 0.5% of their annual pay bill. So that goes into a levy. So companies have a couple of opportunities. They could just leave the money and lose it effectively, or they can try and access eligible qualifications against a levy. So the money goes into, for example, a levy pot, if we call it that. They can draw down money against that pot to take eligible qualifications. And we've had a wide range of different companies. So this is not just for large companies with an annual pay bill above 3 million. Small companies can actually access this as well. And the government are very keen to see SMEs as well as large businesses access the apprenticeship levy. And we probably had a fair bit of success in smaller businesses who maybe struggled to recruit international trade specialists, are using this as a way of staff retention, staff recruitment to get people into the business. And if you're a small business whose annual pay bill is below £3 million, up to 95% and usually 95% of the cost of the qualification can be met through the apprenticeship levy. If you're a large business who has a levy pot, then 100% can be covered. And as you can see there, we have a range of qualifications that can be met through the apprenticeship levy, from a level 3, which is known as the International Freight Forwarding Specialist. Yes, some freight forwarders and logistics companies are taking it, but also some importers and exporters as well. We have a level 4 and level 5, a foundation degree, and it is possible, if you have prior experience, that you could possibly enter at level 5. So we look at a foundation degree as being 240 credits. If you have certain experience, you can be exempt from the first year of 120 credits and possibly enter at level 5. Because again, the purpose of the apprenticeship scheme is the government wants to recognise people that have worked and wants to recognise work-based experience. We have obviously linking to a bachelor's degree, and then we have a master's degree as well. So if, again, at the moment, the way it's working with a master's degree, for companies that do have 10 learners or a cohort, it's possible that it's possible to run a master's degree, and we work with the University of Warwick in delivery of that. Now on the screen there, you can see the costs applicable, and you can see how it works in terms of cost for a company with a pay bill above 3 million and a company with a pay bill below £3 million a year. So what I would say is more and more companies are starting to use the apprenticeship scheme, and they're seeing it as a means of gaining competitive advantage. So as companies struggle to recruit, and it's not always the case that companies can just pay more and more money to bring specialists in, because ultimately how much money is an employer prepared to pay to actually recruit a trade specialist. So some companies are having to look about bringing people in and giving them incentive to stay with the company and reward the learning. So the apprenticeship scheme is a good way of doing that, and a good way of gaining competitive advantage as well. Because for all the companies on the call, it is about gaining competitive advantage. And the best way of gaining competitive advantage is to have trained and qualified staff. Next slide, please. Okay, so probably we're sort of coming to the end of my part here. What I want to say is, if we have anyone on the call in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, the devolved nations, the apprenticeship scheme operates slightly differently there. So what I've been talking about is very much for an employee that spends more than 50% of their time in England. That's their work time. But if there's anyone from obviously the devolved nations, don't hesitate to contact us. we are working with universities and development agencies in those countries to create an apprenticeship scheme. We have quite an exciting adventure in Northern Ireland, which will be starting in September as well, and certainly we're hoping to launch something similar in Scotland and Wales shortly there. And please, anyone interested in the apprenticeship scheme, then just email apprenticeships@export.org.uk, as noted on the screen. So I think my final slide is coming up. Thank you. So if you have any inquiries about the qualifications, if you just email us at courseinquiries@export.org.uk, we'd obviously be pleased to speak with you and talk about which qualification is best. Now, clearly details of our qualifications are available on our website, www.export.org.uk. Under qualifications, and you may have a clear idea of which qualification you want to do. You may have work colleagues, you may have people who you've networked with who have done the qualifications. But if you're not sure about the type of qualification, or you want an enrolment form for a qualification, please just email us, please just contact us, and we'd be very happy to progress. So thank you very much for listening to me. At this stage, can I pass over to Jade Forshaw, one of the Institute's former students. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with the Institute and the courses that I've done and what I'm doing now and how it relates to my everyday roles. If we can just switch to the first slide. So I started with the Institute studying the Advanced Certificate in International Trade. I thought it was a really good base course to start with. It gave you a bit more knowledge about the workings within business and a bit more detail. I'd worked in business before that, but it really did give me a better base knowledge to start with, and also really helped me relate what I was doing to the theory. Also, should I say the theory to what I was doing within the business at the time. So really gave me that connection between the two. I then went on to turn that into the diploma in international trade. I thought that was really useful. Again, more detail, asked for more experience and more collaboration between what you were doing on the course and what you were doing in your business. And I really feel that that helped the businesses that I was working for at the time, because it helped me understand the way in which I could communicate those courses and communicate my learnings to the business and turn them into procedures and processes that I could implement. I'd enjoyed working in logistics for quite a few years, so I did understand a bit about the courses already. But after realising there's not many of us in trade compliance, I decided that I really liked that area of the business and thought that these courses lended themselves really well to that niche job sector, because it really does cover a wide range of what the business does in international trade and is perfect for someone like myself who has now gone on to consultancy. It really does allow you to touch on every part of the business and help the business in different areas. It doesn't limit you to one sector such as logistics or customs. It's a really good all-round course. If we can go on to the next slide. So after the Certificate in International Trade started, I realised that there was actually quite a few people studying the same course. I found that really useful. One of the biggest things that I can say to you all is, if you do a course or you put one of your employees on one of these courses, is that having other people doing the same course in other business areas is really helpful. Those people can give you answers to questions you've been wondering about. You can draw from their experience. It's really helpful to know other people doing the same types of roles as you, but in other industries. And as Kevin said earlier on, becomes this great network of people that you can rely on if you're stuck, or if you are, like he said, lonely. Being a consultant or a trade compliance individual within a business can be quite lonely. I myself have been the only person doing that job in several businesses, and that can feel quite pressured and quite lonely at times. So it's really good to have other individuals to pick up the phone to and to sense check things with. And I do believe that the Institute really brings everybody together in this industry. So it's a really good forum for that. As I said before, I think the main thing that I got out of the courses is a way to try and communicate that theory and those processes that we should have in place better to a business. More often than not, you find that when you ring HMRC or speak to the government, that they communicate things in a you must go and do this way, or a regulatory language way, and businesses don't respond to that because they don't know how to implement, or they do implement but don't realise the implications of doing that on several departments. And I feel that these courses have really helped me convert that language into something more understandable for the business and really help them to implement in different ways. Because as you all probably know, different departments need different things when it comes to international trade, and I do feel this course really helps with that. Can we do the next slide? So from an impact point of view, I started very early on in my career with the Institute. I did a lot of Chamber of Commerce type courses with tutors from the Institute and trainers from the Institute who introduced me to this. And then I went on to do the advanced certificate, etc. So I really started early on. I was doing logistics at the time, but it's really helped me grow in my career and helped me understand which direction I want to take it in. There's a lot of options at the Institute for which way you want to take this. You can go in a customs route, you can do a logistics route, you can do a compliance more widespread route, and it really helped me focus on what I wanted to do and which direction I took my career in. And as a result, I've ended up working for some great names, and for the last year I've been working as a consultant for several different businesses, doing the job I like for different people every day. So I feel like it's really helped me focus and ended up in something I enjoy, which is great. The support that you get is fantastic. There's a lot of tutors on the end of the phone for you if you need that. People are available by email. The forums are really great for asking questions, and people get back to you quite quickly. And the information that's available online through the student forums is really useful, and I do recommend that anybody who's going to start these courses use that to their full advantage. Do we have another slide? So that was probably quite quick, but yes, I recommend any of the courses, and I do feel that the most important thing about the Institute is really linking people up in the same industry, which is quite a niche industry, but growing given the current climate. And I think that's the biggest benefit that I've had out of the courses and out of knowing the people on this call, is that I now have a network of people to link to for answers, whether it be for answers for my business itself or whether it be answers for businesses I'm working for. I think that's really the most useful thing I've got out of it. So I will hand you over now to Holly, who is also a student. Thank you very much.
Jade. Hello everyone, my name is Holly Tonge, and I currently work as Director of Special Projects at the Institute of Export and International Trade. I just wanted to talk a little about my learning journey overall really, and how it's shaped what I do. Can we just move on to the first slide please? So just to give you a bit of my background, I worked for my early years near the Port of Felixstowe in related services, mostly freight forwarding and customs clearance and customs warehousing. For those of you that maybe don't come from that sort of business, I was quite surprised when I joined that there was no formal training or qualification required to go into that line of work. And really it was just a very much learn on the job type of scenario. Unfortunately, the people teaching you don't always understand fully how what they're doing relates to the bigger picture. So quite often I was being asked, well, you have to put 100 in this box and you have to do this, but they couldn't really explain why. So that led me to kind of spending quite a lot of time reading sections of the customs tariff to try and figure it out myself. I kind of worked my way up in that industry, but still it was very much a technical level knowledge that I had. I was quite fortunate in the fact that I managed to take the last freight forwarding company I worked with through the authorised economic operator process. And I also managed a lot of their authorisations. So I gained quite a lot of insight into things there. That led me to start working for a small consultancy, predominantly helping other companies get through AEO. What I was realizing was I was competing against much more senior, older businessmen that were looking to do a similar thing, and I didn't really have a credibility that I could bring to the table. And that is specifically why I looked for a customs related qualification. And as far as I'm aware, this level 5 diploma is pretty much the most specific and senior level qualification you can kind of get that goes into the detail of customs processes. So that's why I looked to do it on top of an MBA at the same time. So everyone thought I was a bit crazy, but whereas the MBA brought in a lot of senior business management skills, finance and strategy and things, you know, of course it doesn't go into the customs level details. So I felt between the two of those, then I would have quite a good level of qualifications, so that potential clients would actually have faith that I knew what I was talking about. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Part of this course I studied in the UK, and partly whilst I was working abroad in Africa. So for any of you that do a lot of travel, or your location may change, this style of learning is ideal for that. You can literally study it from anywhere in the world. I didn't have any problem logging on to tutorials or forums from, you know, quite remote places in the middle of Rwanda at times. I prefer distance learning. I've done my previous 2 degrees with the Open University. I like to study on my own terms and when I'm in the mood to study. And also the line of work I'm in doesn't really lead to a kind of regular schedule, so I wouldn't be able to get to you know, a Wednesday night class every week or something like that. So this was the ideal setup. I found the time, you know, really manageable. Totally advisable to study in kind of bite-sized chunks. Sometimes I managed that, other times it built up a bit, and then I would have a very intense weekend, but it was completely achievable. So overall, that part was very positive. And as Jade and Kevin have kind of stressed, there's a lot of support available if I was not understanding a particular element of it, or actually realise that I've come across this, and now I have more questions. The tutor was always available, either by phone or email, to actually answer and elaborate or point me in the right direction. The other thing I think I'd say about this is on the diploma I did, you got a recommended reading list. Now, typically, I'm the sort of person that if I don't have to read something, I won't. So my initial plan was to kind of breeze over that. But for some reason I decided maybe I should give it a go, and a couple of the books I read from there have really changed my outlook. I feel like they have lit up kind of light bulbs as to how I better explain things to people going forward. So definitely as well, the additional materials have shed a lot of light on how I view things. Next slide, please. So when I started this, as I say, I was working for a small consultancy specialising in AEO, and that was great. I was already getting a lot of experience going into different sorts of businesses in the international supply chain, and I kind of assumed that's where I would remain. I didn't realise that it would be a prerequisite for the sort of role I am now currently working in. So had I not studied this particular diploma, the opportunity to work with the Institute would never have even arisen. It wouldn't have been on the horizon. So actually, the way it's kind of changed what I do has been extraordinary and much unexpected from where I went in from the start. So really wanted to stress the point that it's a very well regarded qualification, the level 5 diploma in World Customs Compliance and Regulations, highly regarded at industry level, and yeah, allows me to train people in things like customs and logistics, which is, very enjoyable to kind of spread the knowledge. So, and also, experiences I've gained along the way from doing this role. What it's also done is by shifting into this line of work, I'm now involved in lots of different types of projects. I still do quite a lot of AEO, but I've been working very closely with non-inventory linked ports and the setup there. I've been working with importers and getting them inward processing authorization set up, and it's really broadened my horizons, and I feel like I'm constantly on a giant learning curve even now, but the experience I'm gaining is incredible. So it's really been quite great. Next slide, please. In terms of the importance about learning about global trade, really, as I was stressing from my earlier experience, you kind of quite often fall into international trade. You don't necessarily leave school and go gunning towards this line of work. However, without that greater level of knowledge, there's going to be a limit to how much you can progress in this particular area. And never has it been so important than it is now with Brexit, upcoming trade wars. All of a sudden, this skill set is really truly in demand and being talked about for the first time I can ever recall. It also, it gives you a bird's eye view of how international trade works. Previously, I'd spent a lot of time in UK and a bit of EU legislation. I'd never thought of looking at world level and understanding actually how it's designed from the World Customs Organization and the World Trade Organization perspective, and then rained down and interpreted by currently first the EU and then the UK, sheds a huge amount of light on how things work. And also there's interesting aspects you can draw on that when looking at Brexit and understanding a lot of what we work to now is driven by the World Customs Organization, and therefore there is some certainty in what will happen irrespective of the scenarios, because certain things must be available for countries that are members. So that part I found really fascinating and enlightening. And yeah, everywhere I go, companies are asking me, who do I know that has expertise and knowledge in this areas? Everyone's looking to recruit or try and find qualifications that their senior management can actually go through, because there's a danger in falling into global trade, not understanding the intricacy of the rules involved, and then there's a huge compliance risk on companies. I reckon at least 80% of the businesses I work with have had a warning, penalty or fine from customs at some point, because there just isn't the clear understanding of what rules companies should be following. It's easy to fall into, it's much harder to do correctly. So that's why learning through courses that the Institute provide is so critical. Next slide, please. So in terms for tips for future students, definitely the materials that you start with are a great basis, but what it really does is help you learn where to look for answers in the future. I mean, none of this is static. Customs change how they do things all of the time. We will see massive changes after Brexit. So the learning materials are constantly updated, but also the situation is ever changing. So understand that this will tell you what you need to know, but you will be on a lifelong learning journey. In addition, definitely by speaking to different people. If you're not in international trade at the moment, your tutor can help you with specialist projects, looking at areas that you're looking to go into, so you can understand how to research those. Yeah, just make sure you have a couple of free weekends before the assignments are due, in case you have to do any last minute reading. And that's it really from my perspective, I think.
Great, thank you, Holly, and thank you, Jade and Kevin as well. There's a lot of information there as usual, and some really good tips at the end too. Thank you, Holly. we're now going to move on to the Q&A. So please do feel free to ask questions using the control panel to the right-hand side of your screen. We've got about kind of 10-15 minutes if we get lots of questions, so please do feel free to send them in. The first one we had was sent in advance from Nav, and he asks, as someone who's just joined an export department and is facing difficulties to handle things or is struggling to understand some of the complexities, where should he start? What sort of qualification should he be looking at? Over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, so obviously the level depends, I guess, on the level of experience and the prior knowledge of the learner. Probably if somebody is new to exporting and the requirements, probably the best qualification to start with is the level 3 certificate in international trade. If you have some business experience already, whether that's a degree or a sort of prior qualification in business management or something, it is possible to start at the level 4 diploma in international trade level. But I would definitely probably say the level 3 certificate in international trade, possibly the level 4. So they would go through certainly the level 3, the basics, the fundamentals of international trade, how it operates, the documentation, how transport, how logistics, how customs operate. So that's probably the most likely level. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. A question for Holly and Jade, really, and this is kind of to do with how did you find balancing the work with obviously your other commitments? Because obviously you were both doing lots while studying with the institute. So how did you find that balancing act? Jade, do you want to start on that?
Well, I think I agree completely with Holly. I'm very much have spurts of energy for this. We both do busy jobs and work with lots of businesses. I found that it was really flexible, and that was great for me because I don't always have the time, as Holly said, to do a session every week at the same time in the same evening. So it really worked for me being able to pick it up and put it down whenever I liked. And I did often find that, you know, I'd have a good few weeks where I did regular bits of work, and then maybe towards the end I would have a full weekend where I needed to do quite a bit. But it really lends itself to that kind of flexibility.
Holly, anything to add to that?
Only hopefully in terms of inspiration, if I can do a full-time job and a master's and a diploma, you should be able to hopefully juggle your commitments and be able to get through this. You can study each module at a time. So if you need to do one module and take a break and then do another module 3 months later, you have the flexibility to do that. And that is, as Jade says, the beauty of this distance learning. You make it fit your time frame.
I completely agree. I took a year out nearly. So I took 9 months, 10 months out between my third module and my last one in the diploma because I was so busy at work with the project that I didn't have any time to study. So absolutely spot on with that example.
Great, thank you. That's yeah, it's an amazing achievement for all of our students. We're also busy, but yeah, I think Holly, you might take the prize in terms of doing an MBA as well. A question from Jill is about the exams actually. So are the exams purely is it kind of exam based or is it assignment based as well, Kevin?
Yeah, so in the majority of qualifications, it's very much more assignment based, which you have the opportunity to link to your business. So what we do is 3 times a year, and the first working day of April, August, and December, we issue the assessments, and the length varies. So, for example, it could be a 3,000 word assessment for one of the modules at our level 4, level 5 qualifications, and you would have 6 weeks to submit from a date of issuance. So one of the advantages of that is, I guess, if you walk into a classroom and you're asked to complete questions or assessments in 3 hours, is it's not necessarily a a work experience related exercise. It's more a memory recall exercise and how much you can handwrite in 3 hours and how quickly you can do it. So you get the opportunity to research, to apply it to your business, and that 6 weeks time is very, very important. So that's very much how we sort of operate. There's 1 or 2 qualifications at level 3 which are more sort of multiple choice based, but our majority of qualifications are more assessment based because we feel they're hugely relevant to businesses. And if you're not in a business, and does it apply to me because I'm not working in an importing exporting business, for example, you obviously get the opportunity to study it and to apply it to either a sort of company that you're creating, or a company that you want to work with, or a sector you want to work with as well. And if you're a trade advisor, you get the opportunity to apply it against your potential clients, for example, as well, and their circumstances. So there's a lot of flexibility there, and it's very reflective, but most importantly of all, it's very practical. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Next question, we'll go back to another student one, so Holly and Jade, and it's mentioned that the assignments and the learnings can be applied against the work you're doing with your company or in general. Also, you won't maybe want to go into company specifics all the time, but what sort of things were you able to kind of learn and gain from being able to apply the learnings to your company? Holly, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I've got quite a specific example, I suppose, whereby one of my projects I actually did on the current version of AEO here versus trusted trader schemes around the rest of the world. And on the basis of that, I had the opportunity to ask a lot of companies exactly what they got out of the process, how they found it, and I got some real good detailed data about what they liked, what they didn't like. I was then able to kind of feed that back into a AEO working group at government level. So at least then the kind of individual thoughts of businesses went straight through there. So in terms of the complexity of it, it was really down to designing an appropriate questionnaire, getting the tutor to kind of okay that, and then just pinging it out via SurveyMonkey and analysing the results, and then researching online what's available in different countries around these trusted trader schemes. So I think I did the prep and the research one weekend. I sent out the survey throughout the week and then analysed the results the following weekend. So in case it sounds technical and complicated, it was actually fairly straightforward. But I got some really meaningful data from it, which has been quite useful since. So that's my project. Jade probably may have done something entirely different.
Actually, my project was very similar to yours, but on a different subject. So I actually worked with the business that I was in at the time. We needed to do quite a bit of work on Incoterms with the existing suppliers that they had and some customers. So we did, I did a very similar thing. I created a questionnaire, almost like a Brexit readiness questionnaire, an international trade readiness as well. And we sent that out to the main suppliers that covered the business. And we had some individual sessions with those suppliers. We set up what we called a Brexit day. And we had a conference in the morning. They came in and we had sort of 10-minute phone sessions in the afternoon and face-to-face sessions whereby we spoke to businesses about what Incoterms they had, what they were planning on doing with us, what the implications were, and really educated at the same time, which scared us a bit at the time, but kind of was a really good opportunity for us to educate our suppliers so they were doing a better job, so they didn't affect our supply chain either. And it worked in a similar way to what Holly's just explained. I set the questionnaire up, I liaised with the business and checked they were okay for me doing that. They were very supportive and they thought it would benefit them greatly. So it was a real collaboration between me and the business, and we got a lot out of that. And as a result, we were able to negotiate new terms with businesses, arrange Brexit-proof plans that would see us through Brexit, whatever the results, and really kind of knew what our risk was from a supply chain point of view going forward with those suppliers. So it really helped us all around. And I think I remember getting a half-decent result as well. So benefited everyone.
Excellent, well done. And yeah, I know it's often kind of fed back to us that it's one of the real benefits of the qualifications is that you're basically sort of getting an internal staff to do a consultancy project for you on something which actually genuinely matters. So who needs consultants when you can train up your own staff? We've had a question in from Aaron, who's asked, with the upcoming changes in the EU, there's going to be a lot of focus on risk management and increasing costs of goods and services, impacting trade and our ability to maintain business relationships. Is this a prominent component of the different qualifications, and what are your recommendations in regard to this? So, Kevin, that's quite a big question, but over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's quite an interesting question. Thank you very much for that. So I guess a couple of ways of approaching that. So focus clearly in terms of Brexit. One of the key things that the Institute provide in our Brexit planning is a need to engage with your customers and suppliers, and that's probably the most important thing you need to do. So that's a key element that obviously comes out in the qualifications as well. So clearly, it's not just a case of communicating with your customers and suppliers, it's what your communication is going to look like. So Jade, for example, just mentioned Incoterms, terms of trade, for example, sort of clarity on what the responsibilities potentially of both parties are going to be. So whether that's the Incoterm, who is responsible for making the customs declaration, is there clarity on what certifications are going to be required or who's going to do them? So whether that's the likes of CE mark, catch certificates, for example, health certificates, who's going to be responsible for those elements. So again, the qualification looks at the different aspects of trading and informs companies and obviously through their employees taking the qualification, what those conversations need to be. Not just the fact we need to speak and try and reassure the customer in Europe, for example, that we're still open for business, or the supplier that they can still supply us, but really start to look at the impacts. So start to look at the impacts are what are the impacts? Who's going to make the customs declaration? How are we going to do it? What are potentially the tariffs are going to be? So for example, the UK previously announced prior to 29th of March that the 12-month temporary import tariffs. Now that clearly might change as we run up to October, but what are potential impacts? How do we identify what our tariffs are going to be? What are import tariffs on our goods entering the European Union? Are we clear on, as I've said before, on what certification, how we can mitigate that? So again, how we can mitigate that through, whether that's through the likes of authorized economic operator, whether it's through customs special procedures, duty deferment accounts and things like that. How can we mitigate? So the qualifications go into a lot of detail in that respect and help companies in terms of their Brexit planning. But again, as I've said before, gain competitive advantage through the quality of the staff and having professional staff, which, as I've said, is probably the most important issue for companies now, is having that quality of staff, professionally trained staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. And we've got time for one last question. And I think it's quite an important one. I touched on one of your points earlier, Kevin, was to do the apprenticeship levy. If you're in an HR department and you're thinking about using it to kind of drive up export skills in the team, how do you go about doing that? And how do you go about doing that with the IUE's course qualification?
Yeah, so I guess obviously you'd need to determine the annual pay bill of the company. And any company that's certainly under the scheme I described that's based in England, and there'll be hopefully similar schemes, as I said, in the devolved nations. As to determine if your annual pay bill is about £3 million, you have the opportunity to draw down potentially up to 100% of the cost of the qualification. And if you're a smaller business below that, you have the opportunity for 95%. You can then make an inquiry to the Institute, and we can talk about the most appropriate qualification. And again, it kind of depends. So if you're looking to attract new people to the industry or people that are recent in your company, you might look towards, for example, a level 3 standard, or possibly to go to the beginning of the foundation degree and go through that journey to really underpin people to move from a foundation degree to a bachelor's degree. So effectively you're developing somebody to actually proof your company readiness for the future. And if you've got people who are more experienced, because obviously, as I've indicated, apprenticeships are about, if you like, rewarding people for their work experience, you might be able to enter the apprenticeship at a higher level. So there's an enormous amount of flexibility. And I would argue when a lot of people look at apprenticeships, they just think, oh, it's somebody leaving at school at 18, it's an alternative to going to university. All that has totally changed now. We have some big businesses and we have SMEs that are looking at this. This is a way to recruit, to actually embed people in the ethos of the organization and do a professional qualification. And there's been an enormous amount of successful companies. And again, HR companies, once you're signed up to the apprenticeship scheme, you effectively can put different employees, different schemes through as well. And we feel this is a unique opportunity with what's going on in the world of international trade and everything happening for companies to take advantage. So this is an opportunity that the government is giving businesses to actually take advantage of that. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kevin, and also thank you to Holly and Jade. We're going to wrap it up now, but that was a hopefully very useful webinar with some really important advice and information there. So thank you all three of you for speaking. And as you can see, global trade there's a lot to learn, but there's also lots of opportunity in there as well. So yeah, please have a look at the site for more information about our qualifications after. And in terms of what else the Institute is doing at the moment, some of you will know that the Incoterms rules that play a central role in international trade, among others, are changing next year. We will be running a series of training courses in the autumn to help you stay up to date with these changes, so we definitely recommend you look at those. The Institute continues to do a lot of work in professionalising skills and knowledge around international trade generally, and our professional pathway is an ideal way for you to learn how exporting is done. We're also going to be running lots of Brexit-related training courses. Obviously, Boris Johnson has said that he's upping his Brexit, no deal Brexit preparation, so businesses really should be as well. So do have a look at the website again for more information on those. That's export.org.uk. In terms of Open to Export, our next webinar will be about making the most of international trade shows. That's on August 14th, and you can find sign-up details for that at opentoexport.com/webinars. But as always, please do take our exit survey to let us know what you thought of today's webinar and to give us any suggestions for improvements or future topics. But yeah, enjoy the heat, and we'll speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye.